guys, welcome to this next instalment of In Conversation With, right here with Bass in Mind. I'm Phil Mann, and I'm pretty excited today because the gentleman that I've got in the chair that side of me, not only is he probably one of the most celebrated British session bass players we've ever produced, it's also his birthday and he's an old mate of mine, Mr. Swift. Hello Dave, how are you, mate?
I'm very well indeed.
Yeah, look, you was all chirpy. Everyone did this. Mo did this a minute ago as well. We did an interview with Mr. Foster for the instalment prior to yours. And Mo's all chirpy and he's all like relaxed. And then you press record and he sits up straight and goes all quiet. So it's all good.
When
Um,
the coffee kicks in.
yeah, tell me about it, man. Tell me about it. My whole life is coffee fueled, as you can see. I'm a one man army with bass in mind. So it's there's a lot of work. Um, for the guys that are unfamiliar with Dave's work, how you can be unfamiliar with Dave's work is beyond me because I go to all the British bass guitar shows. There's Mr. Swift. I get copies of Bass Guitar and Bass Player magazine. I'm sure I'll take just a few moments before I find you in here. Probably won't do it in real time because knowing my luck, I won't be able to find you. Although I did find that stuff, and we should talk about that later on.
There is a Bergantino ad in that mag with me in the advert. So
there you go. I told you.
Somewhere.
I think the funniest one that I love with Dave was I went over to NAMM. I go to NAMM every year, and I turned up and there's this massive Ibanez stand, and I took this selfie and I sent it to Dave, and it was Dave. I don't know why, but for some reason I always feel like you're kind of looking over my shoulder, and obviously there's this 20-foot photograph of Dave Swift in all his glory over me, but it's a nice thing. Away from all
with my eyes following you around the room.
Yeah. Away from all of the kind of the promo and the photographs and stuff like that, one of the best things that I absolutely love about being part of the music industry is having personal relationships, getting to know the people away from the limelight. And if I sit here and I go, okay, here's Dave, let's talk about Dave. Where do you start? Dave, from the Jules Holland Rhythm and Blues Orchestra, I can roll off Suggs, Mel C from the Spaceballs, Paul Young, Chris Diff, I love Chris, Sir Tom Jones, Ruby Turner, Rag and Bone Man, Lulu, Slash, Ronnie Wood, Heather Small, Bonnie Raitt, Kylie, Booker T, Sir Paul McCartney, James Morrison, Albert Lee, Beverly Knight, Sting, Paul Simon, who we're going to talk about in a little while, Jessie J, Gregory Porter. It goes on forever. But what your CV doesn't normally say is that you're an absolute horror fanatic, and we can see that in the background up there. If I go onto the internet, I can kind of Google you, and I will see you playing with probably some of the finest musicians that have ever walked this planet. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in you, mate. I want to talk about you. I want to talk about Swifty's rise. I want to know everything about Dave. When you get that call sheet and someone goes, "Oh yeah, this weekend you'll be playing on the Hootenanny New Year's Eve." Was it Ruby Turner? You got Sir Tom Jones on there, and then you kind of sit down, look at all the materials, and go, "Right, I got to start preparing." What goes through your head? Where do we start? That's the sort of things we're going to get onto.
Sure.
But what I first want to know is this: Jules Holland. Jules Holland was that sort of seminal point where we've got a big career before that. We go on to the cruise stuff. We'll talk about your early life in a second. But Jules Holland is that seminal fork where all of a sudden, for me anyway, in your exposure, it blew up and we can see a big list of artists as a result. Tell me about the relationship with Jules. Tell me about meeting Jules. What was the lure from Jules? Why did Jules go, Mr. Swift? The auditioning process and all that sort of stuff. So tell me right back to year dot. Tell me about the relationship with Jules.
Well, I suppose it's important to know how I became aware of him. So I was actually a big fan of the band Squeeze,
Yeah.
which Jules was in. He was the keyboard player in, and I used to buy Squeeze records. I used to listen to them on the radio. So I was a fan. This is when I was a kid. The next time I became aware of him is when he did that live music TV show called The Tube.
Yeah.
Which many people will be way too young to remember. But it was kind of a precursor to later with Jules Holland. So it was him and Paula Yates presenting this live music TV show. And I used to watch that a lot, mainly because I'd already been a brass player, excuse me, but I'd just taken a bass and there was no tutors around. So I used to watch the Tube to see all the bands, to watch all the bass players playing. That's what I learned. So I was very familiar with Jules from that. But then after that, after the Tube stopped being on TV, for me, he wasn't present after that, and I was doing my own thing. But it wasn't until I moved to London in 1988. And I moved to London to play with more creative musicians, because I'd been a session player the whole time. I wanted to play, more jazz, more improvised music. So I moved to London and I started to work with like-minded players. But I was mostly playing acoustic double bass. I barely touched the electric. That was deliberate on my part because of the whole jazz thing. So, and then one of the sax players I was working with, he'd already was doing some work with Jules. Now, bearing in mind, this is the late 80s, early 90s, and Jules wasn't who he is now. So in other words, he had left Squeeze, but he hadn't got the TV show, he hadn't got the radio show, he wasn't as famous as he was now. But I still remember thinking, oh, that's Jules from the Tube and from Squeeze, whatever. So my friend said, and Jules had been using Pino Palladino on bass. In fact, when Pino moved from Wales to London, his first gig was with Jules Holland. And Jules had also been using the bass player with Squeeze at the time called Keith Wilkinson, but they only played bass guitar. Jules at the time really wanted an upright player.
Yeah.
So he put the word out to his musicians, and my friend Phil had come to me and said, listen, Jules is looking for a double bass player. Do you want to audition for the gig? And I remember being very casual about it, because again, Jules wasn't who he is now.
Yeah.
Now, if it was now and you had the audition, it would be a much bigger deal because of what would follow on from that. But back then, Jules was very low key. He hadn't really, become as famous as he is now. So that was it. His studio is down the road from where I live. It's 5 minutes away. So I went to the studio with my double bass, and Jules was there with the guitarist. And I had no idea what was going to be played, what was expected of me. And we just jammed for half an hour. I can't remember what we played, but all sorts of stuff. And it all seems to go well. But again, I just thought, this is pleasant. I wasn't thinking, oh my God, I was very nonchalant about the whole thing, really bizarrely. Anyway, at the end of it, Jules turned around and said, look, I love your playing, it's fantastic, but we do have a lot of people to see.
Right, okay.
And that to me kind of sounded like, getting the elbow. And I just thought, that's fair enough. No sweat. So I was putting the double bass back in his case. Jules and the guitarist went outside for a chat. And a couple of minutes later, Jules came back in and said, oh, look, it's all fine. You've got the gig. It's all yours. Here's the carrier bag full of cassette tapes with gigs and rehearsals on there. Go off and learn them. And we start touring in a month or something like that. So that was it.
Crikey. It was kind of, what I love there is the whole not knowing what it's going to become. You kind of, it's turned up as is, and I think this is the for any of the students and any of the guys that are sort of trying to get be the best incarnation of themselves. I think one of the things to learn straight away from there is that even the guys that are doing it now that you idolize, probably when it started, didn't realize it was going to be anything, it kind of.
Well, we had no clue because it was a small band as well. It wasn't the band that you see now. It was a 9-piece. It was a 5-piece rhythm section and only 4 horns. It was small. And those early gigs were just very tiny venues, nothing that special at all, a couple of summer college balls type thing, dances, whatever. And we just all thought that was the gig. We just thought this is like a touring R&B type band. But then in 92, the following year, is when Jules got offered later with Jules Holland, the main TV series. And then the year after that was when the Hootenanny started. And it was a real shock to us all because none of us saw that coming. None of us expected it. Perhaps even Jules himself didn't expect it. But we were thrust into this situation, where we had to be something else that we hadn't been before. We became like TV house bands. We had to play with artists we could never dream of. And a lot of the people were ones that we grew up listening to, who are our heroes. And the next thing is you're literally shoved out onto stage. So get on with it. So it was quite a shock to the system, really.
It's nice actually because that was something I've got a little hit list of things that I want to talk to you about and stuff. And actually, you even talk about that natural evolution of. I'm in a band, I thought it was going to be an R&B band, and then all of a sudden I'm a house bass player on a TV show and this sort of stuff. That transition is something I definitely want to focus on. We can talk about the stuff that you discovered, you know, how you had to evolve as a musician, as a personality, what different skill sets, and also things like the strain on technology. You know, things change. Silent stages, in-ear monitoring. I think of sort of Potter and Davis's and the vibrating platforms and things like that. We can get onto that and talk. But before we get there was Dave way back in the day, and you started off on a different platform, mate. I'm going to say that. For instance, let's talk about this, shall we? Because it wasn't just double bass. What happened before double bass, Dave?
Well, I mean, the earliest thing I can remember about music was singing, probably, because when I was a kid, I was always picked to sing in school choirs. And so I obviously love music, and music was in the house. My parents didn't play instruments, but my brothers played guitar.
Right.
Yes, that's me, the ridiculously tall one of the band.
I couldn't spot you.
Being tall, you always get shoved at the back, which means you're always the one that's most out of focus in pictures. Annoying, but yeah. Well, the thing, yeah. So I obviously loved music, and I was singing in the school choir. This is infants and junior school. But then, really, you could argue the whole start of my musical journey came about by getting caught by the local vicar for seemingly trying to vandalize the local church. Which
I'm not going to get a riot come into my flat. We've got protesters here.
It wasn't any kind of religious sort of statement.
Okay. Right.
I think it was 1974, and I would have been 10. So me and a friend of mine, a very, very hot summer, and we were just bored as kids were back then, and we were outside the church, and it's a church where my mum and dad got married. It's right next to my school, and we were just bored, so we were getting little pebbles and we were just throwing them at the wall of the church. It wasn't anything intended vandalism. Again, it wasn't anything against organized religion. It was just two young kids just throwing pebbles at. Anyway, the vicar came out and he said, look, you know, what are you doing? This isn't very nice, you know. And he took us inside. He said, look, if you're this bored that you're just going to be throwing pebbles at the church wall, he said, have you thought about joining the church choir? And now I was already singing the school choir, so I thought, why not? And he said the choir practice is Friday evenings, and we both went along, but my friend he didn't stay long, but I went along to that first choir practice at the church. And I stayed there for 9 years.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I was in that choir. And you know what? I absolutely loved it. So I started off singing treble, then moved to alto, missed tenor completely, and then went on to bass. And it was amazing. And it's funny, it took me years afterwards, I think, to fully appreciate how important that was. And it was Friday practice, it's choir practice. It was 2 services on a Sunday. Now, I have to say this, it wasn't really like a religious thing. Yeah. You know, but nothing against it, but I just love singing and I love music, and the church was very beautiful. It was a lovely place there, and we all became very good friends. So actually so throwing pebbles at the church
it was the start of your career.
It was the start of my career. If I hadn't been caught doing that, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations. Yeah.
But it's nice, even at this really early age, you know, you're talking about compositional sort of hierarchy with tenor, alto, and stuff like that. That's already been sort of beaten into, you know, that before any formal sort of music education.
It's a study of harmony. It was before I even contemplated playing an instrument. It was already happening. It was in my ears.
Now, when the music career started kicking off, again, this is pre-Dave as we know now, you got your sea legs. And there's quite a lot of background knowledge on that. And let's talk about this experience, because it's something
Freddie Mercury years.
Yeah, I like it. It's good. Now, let's first of all talk about life on the boat, and the early skill sets that you got there. Now, with a lot of students that come to me, they look for full-time careers in music. And like me, the moment I came out of college, the first thing I did is I went and jumped on Royal Caribbean and I went and did a cruise. And it scared the life out of me. I did a contemporary education, shall we say. It wasn't Goldsmiths, Royal Academy, jazz. It was sort of rock pop stuff. And the emphasis wasn't on sight reading. And then what happened is I then went for these auditions. Right, I can go and do 6 months, 9 months, I was a jump on, jump off hired gun relieving the long haul guys. I think it was the Albatross of the Sea, if I remember correctly. And I jumped on, do the thing, and the strain, because it was, here's a pad, 200 sheets of music, count it off, and off we went. Tell me about your sea legs, Dave. Tell me about the
Well,
life of times.
I think it's just, if I may just go back a little bit, because I
Yeah,
think
no,
this
you're okay.
is, to actually playing an instrument, because although I tried to play the guitar with my brothers, I hadn't really bonded with it. So when I went to secondary school, I wanted to play a wind instrument, and I wanted to play the saxophone. I think
Of course.
whatever. So I went along to one of these open evenings with older students playing, and there was no saxophone there, so that was gone. I saw a trombone in its case, so I would have been 11 or 12, and I thought that looks fun. That looks a bit weird.
Yeah.
So I chose that, but then they gave it to somebody else. So I ended up with a euphonium.
Okay.
No, it's a tiny tuba, and I studied with me and the trombone player. We had joint lessons, and actually, I've just discovered that teacher is still around. I've reconnected with him after like
Amazing.
46
Amazing.
years.
Yeah,
But
great.
then, because it's the euphonium, and I thought to myself, it's not the saxophone, it's not the trombone. I played it for a while, but I couldn't really invest time in it. So actually, I stopped playing it, and then music it wasn't a thing for me anymore. I was still singing in the choir, but I wasn't playing an instrument. And it wasn't until a few years later I decided to have another go. Took up the trombone.
Yeah.
I actually got the trombone this time,
Yeah.
and I was 14, and that's really when I started to learn, musicianship and music. So from day one, playing the trombone, I was given music to read, and I had to read four clefs, sort of alto, tenor, bass, and treble clef. But also, and I am coming to the cruise ship thing, because
No, it's okay.
when I was a trombone player, I was playing in every band imaginable. So I was playing in orchestras, brass bands, wind bands, jazz, funk, reggae things. This is before I even picked up a bass.
Yeah.
So I could read music very well. I was playing all these different styles, and I took up bass at sort of 15 or 16 just for fun. But of course, when I left school, my trombone teacher said, you'll get a lot more work as a bass player than you will as a trombonist.
That worked out, didn't it?
And he was right. He was right. So yeah. By the time I got to the cruise ships, being able to play double bass guitar, being able to read, those were key things. But that all came from being a brass player.
Yeah.
That training. So yeah, on the cruise ships, a lot of it, and a lot of my work in those days was playing written notation. In other words, there wasn't many situations where I was given chord charts, or there wasn't many situations where I was asked to learn stuff by ear. It was almost everything. 90% of what I was doing was written down, which meant I could do it very easily, because that was what my main training was.
And it is, like I said, as soon as you said, oh, before the bass guitar, I went, course, trombone, because I've seen so many photographs, on some sessions. I'm sure he plays bass guitar, and all of a sudden the bones out at Jules's place. But obviously it's the same clef. So by the time you went over onto the bass, those skill sets were already in place. So when those employment opportunities arose, you kind of already had that thing happening. So I
was still playing. I was still a pro trombone player as well. But my trombone teacher was right. It became clear that pretty much every band needed a bass player. Not every band needed a trombone player. So yeah, the bass took over really. But the cruise ships were great, because one, you're traveling the world. I played on 4 different ships.
Okay.
From 1984 to 1988, and of course it's fantastic, because you're traveling all over the world. You're experiencing these different cultures. You're meeting a lot of people. You're playing a lot of different music. So yeah, it was one of the best experiences, and just the most fun. It was just a great laugh, But and of course, we were traveling to America for the first time. So I remember going to New York and buying my first fake book, which was the real book. And it was just a very exciting time. But I remember going to New York as well and finding jazz records that you couldn't get back home.
Yeah.
So I just went kind of crazy, just walking back to the ship with piles.
The boat's got ballast on one side as it goes out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But that was the thing. See, for me, I've always been, a lot of guys that were on the ships. It was just a laugh for them, and it was a laugh for me too. Don't get me wrong, but I've always been very conscientious about music and my own musicality and my own ability. So even on there, I was always working, I was always practicing. So yeah, I might have been up in one of the rooms playing dance music in the evening, but then I would come back to my cabin and I'd be transcribing Jacko's lines and Stanley Clarke's solos, whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was very conscientious that I wanted my musicianship to develop. I just didn't want to coast along, so to speak.
There's like, I love the transcription side of things. I've actually on the With Bass in Mind social media pages, we've shared some of your hand transcriptions that you put up. And it's something actually that, just quickly while we're on that, from an academic standpoint, a lot of people are transcribing using Sibelius now. And it obviously, the art, it's almost like handwriting, the art of hand notated sheets. It's getting lost a little bit because of computer aided design that's coming out a lot. But for the guys that are watching, handwriting and stuff is actually a left side brain function. So it's a completely different skill set. And it's not something that you just, if you can do notation on a computer, you can grab a pen and then write it out again. And obviously that aids learning massively. How much did you take from the transcription process as opposed to just reading dots? Was there things you learned as a musician from that?
I mean, transcription for me is such a crucial part of well, certainly of my development, because I've been doing it forever. And the interesting thing is that I've found some of my early transcriptions that I did on the QE2,
right?
And they're not very good. I've got to be honest with you. It was really odd because I could read very, very well. I could sight read perfectly well, but it was odd when I was doing the transcriptions. They weren't as accurate as my reading skills, and I've never quite got to the bottom of that. I must ask them about that. But anyway, obviously, as time goes on, your ears get better.
Yeah.
Your knowledge of sort of music, all that kind of thing. So now they're way different to how they were. But I've always done it because back then there were no books you could go and buy with Jacko's solos or Stanley Clarke's, whatever. They didn't exist, So if you wanted to sort of learn their stuff, you had to write it out yourself. And I have to admit, over the years, I've seen some transcription books, and there's a lot of them are not great. There's a lot of inaccuracies. Now, at least my early ones, which weren't great, weren't being published, and I wasn't earning money from them.
Yeah.
But some of these are out there, and they're commercially available, and they're not completely accurate.
They're not. You're right. And actually, it becomes more evident these days. I mean, I've got C's and C's, years and years of transcriptions from my own personal studies. And I've started, putting them into Sibelius and then just sharing them. There you go, guys. Have a watch of that. Yeah. And I get a little message in my inbox pop up. Bar 54 is a bit dicky, Phil. And I think actually just this week I did a Tommy Gobill bass part for Dusty Springfield. Yeah.
I did one of those myself. We'll have to compare notes.
Yeah, but mine was playing along to the MP3. Yours probably wasn't. For Lawrence,
we had to play that for Joss Stone once. But the thing is, it was we had to change the key of it. But I'd already done the transcription in the original key.
Yeah, right.
So I just wrote a new one, But that's the thing, right? And also with commercially available transcriptions, they make people lazy as well, because if you go into a shop and it says I play like so-and-so, play like so-and-so, and you just think I've got the book and it's all written out for me, and there's no question of how accurate it is, and you're not really getting into that play, you're not really listening, you're just reading what someone else has done, and it's completely missing the most vital point of transcription. It is that, because it's you are getting so deep into that play. I mean, sometimes I'm transcribing stuff and I can tell what string they're on or whereabouts on the fingerboard. That kind of stuff is important. There is an American jazz bass player. I think his name's Todd Coolman, and he did a book called The Bass Tradition, and it was all transcriptions of the great jazz double bass players throughout chronologically.
Right.
Time. And I love this saying that he went along to some bass convention and he held up his own book of his own transcriptions.
Right.
And he held it up to all these students and he said, "Please don't buy this book."
I think most people would do that at my first two.
But I thought to myself, how incredible is that for some guy who's earning money from this, But he was just being honest. He was saying, so I've transcribed sort of Jimmy Blanton, Ray Brown, Eddie Gomez, Scott LaFaro. but I don't just want you to buy this and then just take for gospel that that's it. You know, in other words, don't listen to the recording. Let's just do this. He wanted everyone to go out, listen to the albums, buy them, listen to them, do their own transcriptions, you know, painstakingly do all that stuff, because that's where the benefit comes, not just from picking a book and just that's.
I think you absolutely smashed the nail on the head there. From all my time as a university lecturer in town, also over in Florida and with the Players School and stuff like that, everybody that I ever encounter that is at that little level above me where I go, I really wish I could do what he's doing. It all comes back to, well, I didn't learn from a book. I transcribed it. I wasn't taught this bass line. I listened to the record and I worked it out. And I've heard that echoed with conversations from, you know, Lawrence Cottle to yourself, to Mo Foster, to Neil Feckoff. Everybody's saying the same thing. And I'm just wondering, and I'm hoping that people watching this are going to start to get the message. Okay, there's nothing wrong with writing out a transcription, and it's wrong. It's the process of going through that and drafting it that makes you a better musician. It's not just about regurgitating what's on the page that's given to you.
Yeah, it just makes your ears just kind of just do that, and it's to me it's the best thing, and I have to say that I used to do a lot of very complex transcriptions as well. I mean I once transcribed, you know, Jacko's Donna Lee from his first solo album, and the whole solo, and it's like, I don't know, it's like 7 or 8 pages long. It took me months and months and months, and it was a great thing to do, and it was wonderful to see all this stuff. But then I thought to myself, realistically, I'm probably never going to get to play this unless I just do it at home. Attempt to do it at home. You know, this isn't going to work for me on a gig. If I do this in the middle of a Jules Holland gig, I'm going to get fired. You know, so I was glad that I did it, but then I realized it's probably more important to do stuff that I can actually use. So that's the reason why I then spent a lot more time doing Jacko's bass lines as opposed to, say, solos, but also James Jamerson and Carol Kay. You know, stuff that I knew that I could use, that I could take from.
And then there's again another wonderful lesson there for so many people. The bass guitar, I mean, obviously there's different arguments about different designs of instrument stuff, but it's starting to evolve more into a stringed instrument in the bass register, because I'm seeing people doing on the bass guitar, not taken away from their technical ability, they're wonderful, but they're not bassists anymore. They're not in the cash register doing their job. And as we're hearing from the horse's mouth, bless you, you're not a horse, Dave, but you're the size of one. But it is you've just sat there and said, yeah, you know, I worked through all this stuff, and then actually that's probably going to be on the editor's floor. The stuff that I'm going to get paid for is doing my job, and that's where it comes into developing your tone, your timing, and in other skill sets, things like the social aspects and making sure you're a gentleman on stage, you can help out the artists. And this kind of the next bit that I was kind of naturally going to bring the conversation into. I've done the thing, you know, same as everyone. You know, I've done all the function bands and the boats and some light session work. And then there was something that started happening. It's sort of in the last 48 months, really. And that was, I suddenly found myself on stage with a few of the guys that I used to idolise as a kid. Now, it was surprising, the whole fright or flight scenario, how much it affected me. For instance, and we can talk about this because there's common ground, both of us with, say, I worked with Van last year, Van Morrison, Albert Lee, and we've both kind of been on those stages and been beside those guys. But I remember playing Van Morrison tunes day in, day out with all the wedding bands and learning those early albums, like the original Morrison album. Oh my God, it's amazing, you know, and playing Into the Mystic and all this sort of stuff. And then I took the stage with Van and was asked to play the same bass lines that I'd played for 10 years without Van. And my entire state of mind changed. All of a sudden, I don't mind sharing it with everyone, but I had that black, you know, when they called the band rehearsal and I came on stage, it's like, okay, I'm now looking at the back of Van Morrison's head and I've got to play those. I was trembling, worried about what note I should play if I was getting it wrong.
I think, to be honest, Phil, most people who play the band do end up trembling anyway.
But let's talk about this element now. So the state of mind changes. we've seen you, and I've already rolled off that much of your CV, Dave. I mean, it really is quite something. If you're ever going to sit down for a cup of coffee with anybody, it's you. Um, but let's not talk about the finished product just yet. Let's talk about pre-show. Let's talk about you're at home, you've got a beautiful family, you're hanging out, and you're sitting down, and then the message comes in of, "Hey Dave, so and so will be on the show next week or in 2 weeks' time." Um, let's talk the guys through the process from there until the band call, not the band call. I want to know about what do you do? How do you go about it? Do you go back to original recordings? Do you get arrangements? Do you get insights from the players themselves? Is there a little email thread? I remember working with Chris Difford, and Chris, again, mutual ground. Chris was wonderful. Sent me a message. Can we do this? Can we do that key? I'd like to do this chorus twice. There was more input from the artist. Regardless of the name, people are still passionate about the music itself, so they do get involved. Tell us about that process, pre-gig, prep gig, home life, Dave Swift.
Yeah, well, it does change, and it has changed over the years. So, for instance, with Jules's Radio 2 show, which most people are not familiar with, they recognise them for the TV thing, but there is a TV show as well, and with a house band on there. In the early days of that, all we knew was who the artist was. We didn't even get told what the song was.
Wow. Okay.
So we would turn up to the studio, all sitting there waiting, and the artist would come in, and they would just, first of all, sort of say, "Do you know this song?" And it might be one of their hits, or it might be a cover they wanted to do. And then sometimes their manager would bring a CD, and they'd play it in the control room, and we would have to learn it in front of the artist sitting there. Now, there is no bigger pressure you can be put under than that. And I remember it happened with Amy Winehouse. It wasn't the first time we played with her. I think it was the second or third. But she came in, we didn't know the song, and we had to play the tune, and we had to, she's sitting there, probably polishing her nails or something like that. We had to play it in the control room and then obviously stop it. Can we have another listen? But in that situation, it's massively high pressure because she's not going to want to be sitting there while you listen to it a fifth or sixth time.
Yeah.
Or even a fourth time. So really, second hearing of it, you have to know that song. Yeah. And that's what we had to do in those early days. It was, and actually, I'm surprised we didn't complain about it because it really was quite stressful. But at the same time, what it was doing for your musicality and your ears and your ability to play very quick like that was invaluable. It was the best thing. I think as time went on, we started, as we got older, we sort of said, "Listen, could we get a little bit more help here? The night before, you could tell us what the song is. I mean, Hamish Stewart was another one. We did the radio show with him, and the song that he wanted to do was so complex. It had every verse was different, every chorus was different. It had 2 different middle eights. We might as well be playing Stravinsky, And that was tough. But we had to learn it in front of him. He had to show it to us in the studio. And wow. So that was one thing. But like I said, these days what happens is the BBC they used to send us a CD, but more often than not now they just email a track to it. Now, in the past, it's been a bit vague. The first time I played with Shaka Khan in the mid-90s, we did Ain't Nobody and I'm Every Woman. Now, the I'm Every Woman version was a dance remix. It wasn't even the album version, It was a synth bass part. And I learned that, and I didn't even question it because that's what I was given by the TV people. But these days, I'll accept the versions we've got, but I will listen to different versions as well. I want to hear as much information as I can, and that's it. So I get the recording, and the first thing I do with everything is transcription, and I'm still using a pencil and manuscript, and whichever way I do it, and to be honest, most of the time I don't need to slow it down because it's not overly complex. But I will meticulously transcribe the bass line to everything that I'm given to play, and because I want to have every bit of knowledge on there, every bit of information. I want to see exactly what the original bass player is doing. I want to know the exact notes, the dynamics. And I'll do that with all the tune. And it is so time consuming, as you well know. It just, it can be quite daunting, when, say with the Hoot Nanny just gone, and we've got like 12 songs to learn.
Yeah.
And you just know that the time it just takes to do one transcription. It could take an hour. It could take an hour and a half.
That's
So
nightmare.
so it is still a daunting thing. But I just know that at the end of it, I'm going to have precisely what's on that record. I'm going to know every little nuance. If the bass player makes a mistake or plays a wrong note, I've got it on the page. I can choose to correct it. I'll speak with whoever's involved. And sometimes, does it need correcting, or are they expecting to hear that wrong note?
Yeah, but then again, another thing there is we were talking about the Dusty tune earlier on, Son of a Preacher Man. Tommy drops a beautiful clanger in the middle eight in that. I mean, it's atrocious, but obviously
for ages.
different a different period of recording. You probably only got one take at it, so what's on the recording is what it is. I 100% sympathise with you. I remember doing limited exposure, but I did the Lonnie Donegan anniversary for Rock Island 9. I was the house bass player, and I was like a little Swift, just not as talented and not as pretty. And the same thing, there was a wonderful list of artists with Chris Farlow and Paul Jones, and Leo Sayer was on there. That's where I played with Van. And exactly what you're saying. They come up, here's all the songs, and it's like, can we do that little change? And I had gone back to the original recordings. I took an original MP3, and then I tried to find them, because of YouTube, which is a godsend. I found the most recent live rendition as well, because if you're playing songs that are 40 years old, they've evolved, and there's been little hits that they now expect to be there.
Yeah.
Put them all together, I had this wonderful overview, and then turned up at the studio, and then, can we drop that one a tone? And then all of a sudden, every bit of paper in front of you is gone. So once again, your ears come back to help you. Back in the day with trombone, it's there again.
Well, I would, the one key bit of advice I would always say is, never neglect your ears, because, going back to the time on the cruise ship, I remember playing like a lot of pop stuff. And for instance, we'd be playing a lot of Lionel Richie hits. Now, on the cruise ships, I would be given charts, and they'd have the bass part written out. Now, back then, I know this sounds terrible, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I didn't even listen to the recordings. I knew I could sight read anything was put in front of me, and I just trusted who'd ever done the bass transcriptions. So I was playing sort of all night long, Dancing on the Ceiling, all the hits, but I wasn't listening to the recordings, which is insane. The most important thing you can do is to listen to the recording. Because there's sometimes, if you don't get enough time to do these detailed transcriptions or even a quick cheat sheet, the best you've got are these.
And
the best thing you can do is to listen to that recording. It's happened to us countless times. We had Ray Davis was a guest on the Hootenanny once, and he wanted to do a new song of his, which is, and I played on his solo album.
That's right.
I can't remember the name of it now. It was a long time ago, but he wanted to play the single off that, and of course the BBC wanted him to do Pink stuff.
Okay.
And it was a real standoff. It was like a real proper standoff, and it was like, well, how are we going to fix this? So it was agreed that the BBC said, okay, you can do the new single, but you've got to do the King stuff. It's you've got to do both things. So this was like an hour before the recording of the TV show. So we all had to go off into whatever room with a cassette player and learn this new song, and like I said, that when there's no time to write anything out, that your ears are the best thing, and to not go to the source, I think is a mistake. It's always the most important thing.
I remember being at a master class at the Players School in Florida, and we had Victor Wooten was in, and everybody was doing all the same questions: what strings do you use, what guitar you use, all this sort of stuff, and without actually a reason for it. It's like if we talk about a piece of equipment, it's always a good question to say why. So that's actually something we'll reflect on a bit with stage and TV, the differences with that. But I said to Victor, I was, hi Vic, and I said, you play with Bela Fleck and Flecktones. At the moment, I think he was doing the SMV stuff with Stanley and Marcus. And we talked about those things, and then we talked about the Wooten brothers and all this mass of Grammy Award winning music. And I said, Vic, how on earth do you prepare for all this? I've got an Elvis Presley gig at the weekend, or a show, not Elvis, not that, okay, and then or a Journey Boys thing, and I'd spend all week preparing for this. And Victor's going on stage night after night after night with, all these most high-end virtuotic music you could play. And he turned to me and he goes, "Well," he said, "most songs are only certain sections. What messes people up are the order that those sections appear." So he said, "When I wake up in the morning and I'm making the kids breakfast, I'm listening. And then when I get in the car and I drive to the airport, I'm listening. And then when I'm in the airplane flying to the gig, I'm listening. And then I go to the hotel room and I'm listening. And I go to the gig and I'm listening. And the only time I'm not listening is when I take my headphones out to walk on stage." And I think there's something there, even with those guys that are super technical, the amount of pressure and reliance on their ear
Oh, yeah.
is massive. And that's something that I'm going to say I'm starting to see is getting neglected. Instant gratification on the internet, 30-second quick licks, check me out, I'm an awesome bass player. Okay, you can play for 15 seconds, but can you do a 2-hour gig where you've got to play 26 songs, all in different keys, different arrangements with different artists, different sounds, in different venues every night, and then somehow conduct a private life, a family life, your home bills, the rehearsals, and this stuff isn't being recognised anymore. And I think as a result, we're not seeing working bass players. I think they're getting produced less and less. You're getting stringed virtuosos that are kind of forgetting what their instrument's designed to do. So
It's not that bad because it means it's all gigs for us.
well, I mean, let's hope. So that's good. Dave, we talked about. I mean, I gave a silly answer about standing behind Van and all of a sudden going, "Look who that is!" You've done some massive things. I'm going to focus on two specific sort of scenarios you found yourself in, because we know Big Dave. He's normally at the back. He's holding the route down, doing his job. But you played with one of my idols, and in this scenario, you was definitely not at the back. So I'm going to introduce this photo. And first of all, that who looks even smaller than he normally does, Mr. Simon. But that I remember watching that, and you were very much not at the back on that performance. Paul Simon. Let's talk about that experience, Dave, because for you, you was no longer the guy in the shadows. What happened?
Well, it was kind of a very unusual thing because I mean I love Paul Simon. My brother had some Paul Simon records when I was young, and I used to listen to them. Big fan of his, and Simon and Garfunkel as well. So yeah, it was when. And the thing with Jules is what happens is after a while you just think you've played with everyone you can imagine playing with, or you've played with everyone that you think that that's it. My CV is done here. But then
I've completed it.
And I'm thinking, wow, I was so thrilled when I heard he was on the show because, there's a lot of famous people we play for and I admire them and I like their music, but I didn't have a particular personal connection, but him I did. So very excited. And as usual, I just waited for the recording to come along and it was called Wristband. And I'm thinking, okay, whatever. And I'm just expecting a very pedestrian type bass line, or not pedestrian, but nothing too outlandish, And I heard Wristband, and it really is fundamentally a voice and bass duet.
Yeah.
A bit of clapping in between it. And I remember thinking, blimey, this is so unusual. This never happens. So as always, I meticulously did the transcription from the recording the BBC sent, and then we turned up at the studio. And the thing is, we normally, if the show's recorded at 8 o'clock or 8:30, I think it is, we normally get called to be there at 4:30 or something like that. And then the idea is that whoever the rhythm section is, or we run through the song ourselves, and the artist then appears, and then we start to run it with them as a group.
Right.
And then, of course, we have to do it a couple more times for the lighting and the sound people, But it's nice because we get to hang out with the artists for a couple of hours before the show. And yeah, so I was ready to carry my double bass right to the back of the room. And the producer said, "Hang on, where do you think you're going? You're standing here." And I'm saying, "What, in front of everybody, in front of Jules?" And so, well, yeah, because it's a big thing. So that was that. And the next thing, Paul came out and we're standing next to each other. And there is quite a height differential there, I have to say.
Quite.
No, but the fact is that musically he's a giant, much bigger than I. So
Oh, that's humble, Dave. I like that. Just because we're sitting down here, and if anyone hasn't experienced, first of all, Paul Simon's just bordering on Hobbit. Dave, what are you?
I'm
Six,
6'3",
6'3"? Yeah. So it's kind of you could probably put Paul in your pocket as you leave. It's good.
Yeah,
How did it?
he is a diminutive fellow.
How did it change your psyche on stage? I mean, being up front, being that much in the limelight, did that kind of was that a different perspective for you? Did that even with your amount of experience, did it kind of rattle you a little bit, or did you find your
Yeah,
pocket?
no, it was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel conspicuous. Because it is the thing is with me being a bass player, it was different when I was being a trombonist, but I think being a bass player, I always felt it suited me fine because I never really wanted to be out front, lead singer, lead guitarist. I'm really so happy being more in the background, but actually having a very key pivotal role within the group.
Yeah.
I enjoy that sort of paradoxical thing,
Mm.
background, but a key element. So this was a very different thing. I'd never encountered this before, and I'm just thinking, and also you're in a room full of other bands, which
Mm.
means you're in a room full of bands with bass players who are watching you and watching your every move.
Yeah.
And we had the band next to us. I think are they called? I can't remember forgive me the name of them, but anyway,
Okay.
the bass player is a phenomenal double bass player herself.
Right.
So I've got her watching me as well, and I'm playing with Paul Simon, and it's a big bass and voice. So yeah, there was definitely more of an element of being very very conscious about it.
I
So,
do.
yeah,
I mean, I.
it is a pressure thing because because if you mess up, that's captured forever.
Oh yeah.
Unless you turn around and kind of go stop, which is not cool in the studio because then you've got your compromise on the artist because he was probably doing a really good take of something.
Yeah.
So the artist is going to be a bit miffed. It means that all the camera people, all the sound guys are going to have to reset.
Yeah.
All of this because what you played a couple of bum notes sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that it's massively high pressure, and that particular one was probably the highest pressure thing I'd had to do. So, but anyway, I'd done my homework, and this is the key thing: if you do your homework, then really you should be okay. You should be okay. The rest is just girding your loins, taking a deep breath.
It's I think the lovely thing that I definitely want to kind of just reflect on there is also pressure. There's a lot of people out there that are high end bass players, wonderfully technically, developed and blessed. And then they might look at somebody in a job and go, I could do that. Why has he got the gig, or why doesn't? And what they don't really acknowledge is all of the other things that come into state. As you said, a lot of the early transcriptions that we did of stuff back in the 60s, 70s, it's a lot of one takes. There wasn't even a lot of overdubs. You didn't want to upset the vibe or the singer. So there's transcriptions with bum notes in them and they're left forever. There's video footage with it. But the skill, again, that skill set of, it's not about that. Whenever I get nervous, my hands go freezing cold. And I cannot play upright with cold hands. It's as simple as that. Which is terrible because if I'm doing a high pressure gig, it's normally on a double, like I'm doing double and electric, hands go cold, and all of a sudden I'm on stage and I'm going, oh no, this is not going to be good.
Yeah.
But that's what gets recorded. And what people, when you see the finished product, this is what a lot of these conversations about. You see the finished product, it's all lights and camera and prettiness, and everyone's presented, it's framed on TV. But what you're not seeing is the guy that goes, hang on, I've got cold hands, I can't play, or my double bass isn't staying in tune because I've just put new guts on it or something.
Sure.
And they're not seeing all of that stuff leading up to that point, which is what makes you the professional you are.
Well, interestingly, you say that because I want to come back to the Paul Simon thing briefly, but jumping ahead, when we did this recent Hootenanny show, I'd actually done a couple of gigs with my wife Lucy, who's a professional jazz singer, and we'd done some jazz gigs in London, and I hadn't played in earnest for a while, not like a proper gig playing, And also during lockdown, I've been playing a lot more trombone and tuba, my brass instruments, because it's just fun. You know, I don't get to spend as much time on them, so I was been using lockdown to play those, and guitar as well. I've been playing guitar too, but I did a couple of gigs with Lucy, and even for me as a seasoned player, I got some very bad blisters.
Yeah.
On my fingers because I was a little bit overzealous, and it's a rookie error. So, you know, even I still make mistakes. And the thing is, and I then really panicked because I knew there was only a week coming up before the Hootenanny rehearsals. And the honest truth is that when I was doing the Hootenanny show, my fingers were the blisters had burst, but my fingers were quite raw.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this to sort of sound macho or to gain any sort of extra respect or anything like that. But yeah, it was a mistake on my part. I played too much, too close to that gig. So I was playing the Hootenanny with my fingers were in a bad way. You know, they hadn't healed properly. There was still, you know, like sort of cuts in them. But it's my fault. You know, I shouldn't have maybe taken those gigs, or I shouldn't have been so overzealous on them. But when because I was playing without drums, I was playing with Lucy, piano player, and just me. Yeah. And if you're not playing with drums, you've got to be a lot more percussive. So yeah, I was hurting on that Hootenanny, hurting on the Hootenanny, you know. But as you said, it's my responsibility. It's my job. I'm a professional, and you have to do it. And that's the thing, right? When people see me on TV, sometimes even the bass line to Wristband with Paul Simon is not that difficult at all. There's nothing, you know, virtuosic about it. It's just the fact that it's a stands out. It's because it's a solo thing. And I think a lot of people look at what I do, and because I'm not playing sort of virtuosic solos or doing anything very, very sort of flash, that a lot of people kind of think, well, you know, I can do that. I could play that bass line. You know? And yes, you probably could. But the difference is that you're in a TV studio, okay, with cameras all around you, other bands watching you, other bass bands watching you. This is being filmed forever. So if you make a mistake in 10, 20, 30 years time, everyone's been watching that saying, oh, look, that's where he screwed up. You know, all of these things are a very huge pressurized thing. And so you got to ask yourself, yeah, you might be able to play that line in the privacy of your own home, in your bedroom. But try and put yourself into my situation. Yeah. And have to do that hundreds of times. You know, it's, you know, could you do that? Would you be able to do that? You know, and have, because, you know, you do have to have nerves of steel. You have to have a lot of confidence. And even if you're not confident, even if you are a little bit nervous, the last thing anyone wants to see is you displaying that. Your fellow band members, the artists you're working with, no one wants to see nerves or you pacing around biting your nails.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
You know, and the other thing again with the Paul Simon thing is whenever we played that, and I got the transcription and I'd worked it out, and I've got this. You know, every time we played it, he changed it. He moved bars. He was. I don't know what the technical term for it is, but he literally, if it's in 2-bar phrases, he'd sometimes miss a bar out.
Yeah.
So I would have to jump what I was playing. I'd have to miss a bar and jump.
Yeah.
You know? So if it was a repetitive 2-bar thing, he would sing 1 bar, miss that one out, and he'd be on the third. So, and every rehearsal, he did it differently. And even when we came to record it, he did it differently again.
Yeah.
So I was in this, you know, the what's the analogy with the reed in the water? You know, in the river, you know, you've got to move
with the tide. Yeah.
There's no point in staying rigid and getting sort of knocked over. You know, and that for me was, so that's even more pressure than playing with this iconic artist, playing this very exposed part, and he's changing it every single time. You've got to have good ears. You've got to be watching. You've got to be listening. You've got to be on it. You know, and that's a skill in itself.
And it's a skill that has been there habitually in time for a very long time. Actually, if you listen to for anybody watching the original recording of John Lee Hooker, you know, boom, 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 that stuff. Well, John Lee cut that in Chicago. And what a lot of people don't realise is that they drafted in the Funk Brothers. It's James Jamerson on bass. It's Benny Benjamin on kit. And the reason is because basically the in-house guys went, we can't play with this guy. He's continually out of time. He's not playing 12 bars in a 12 bar. He's not going to the subdominant when he should do, or the dominant. He's making his own thing up. So they drafted in people with big ears, basically, which is how Jameson ended up playing on that record, which is absolutely fabulous. We're getting a little bit more into these sort of stresses of being on TV and stuff like that. Now, one of the things that I've not taken well to. I've tried to do it, but in recent years, I've gone from being analog, playing on stage, backline and stuff like that, to then finding myself in isolation. I am more and more going on stage now where I don't have a bass amp. I'll normally be maybe a small cab, but in recent times I was using the Ike board, so I can kind of feel that, and I'm on in-ears a lot. How have you found the stresses of being live and being on TV? Now, we know you've got a wonderful relationship, which is fledgling, with Bergantino. We can talk about that very quickly, and your use of their gear. But let's talk me through that. Tell me about the differences of playing in a studio setting and then playing live, and the things that you're confronted with.
Okay. Well, when I first got the Jules gig, it was baptism by fire. Because bearing in mind that was the first big gig that I got. Prior to that, I was a session musician. So I think all I had at the time was a little Polytone Mini Brute 3 combo, which I still got. I bought it when I was 17, and I've still got it. It still works. But all of a sudden, I got the Jules gig, and again, we were catapulted into this environment where we're playing much bigger stages, bigger venues. And as the weeks went on, the things got bigger and bigger. So and Jules only wanted me to play acoustic double bass. He didn't want bass guitar at all. He was very, very specific on that. So I'd never had to amplify a double bass to those kind of volumes. I'd just been sort of doing jazz gigs, quiet, intimate.
Yeah.
And I realized quickly the problems involved in amplifying an acoustic instrument. So of course it was every day I was battling with feedback, and I was trying different pickups. I was buying feedback suppressors. Behind me at one point I had a rack system, and it had sort of graphic EQs, feedback suppressors, notch filters. It just looked like something from Star Wars behind me. And I'm thinking, I'm playing this beautiful acoustic double bass, and I've got all this, and it's having to go through all of this to play it. And by the time I got rid of all the feedback, whatever, it just sounded horrible. So in the end, and this was before really good electric upright basses were available.
Yeah.
So in the end, I said to Jules, listen, this is, and I did this for a couple of years, and it was a struggle. So I said, and I had a big backline as well, because it was a loud band. I needed to be very loud. And of course, you know what it's like with your intonation. If you can't hear yourself on stage, it's horrible if you're playing out of tune and upright. So in the end, I said to him, look, can I use bass guitar on the gigs, and I will put flats on it, I will mute it, and I'll try and get a double bass type sound. And then in the studio, in the more controlled environments where we've got a microphone, whatever, I'll use the acoustic. So that's what we did. Any TV work, any album recording, or any intimate studio work was all on upright, and in the trenches it was bass guitar. but then of course, with the advent of really great EUBs coming out, so I mean, I use the Yamaha
Likewise
Island basses. The main one I've got, I mean, I've had every model, but I use the SLB 200 limited edition now, which they don't make anymore. But for me, it's the best electric upright bass I've found. It's the one that feels and sounds and plays the most like an amplified double bass. So that was a revelation when they came out. But there was still a problem with the volume on stage. So I've always used fairly big rigs because it's a loud band. But then so many years ago, it became a problem for Jules, because my cab points out right
head height
side on from my cab, So I was trying to turn up to battle the drums, the organ, the horns, whatever. But Jules was being affected. He was hearing it louder out front. So he kept saying to me, "Can you turn it down? Can you turn it down?" And it just got to the point where I was starting to feel a little demoralized, because it's always nice to be told to turn up than to be continually told to turn down. So I kept doing this, and by the time I turned it down so he was happy with it, I'm kind of thinking, I can't hear it. Maybe if I had ears in my calves, I could have, but I couldn't do it. So anyway, Gilson, our drummer, had already gone to in-ears, and Gilson was using a vibrating seat, drum made by Porter and Davis. Now, it meant that Gilson could get rid of that huge monitor that drummers have, And so I decided to go in ears. That was the first step, and it was fantastic. It was the best thing,
isn't it? Yeah.
So I could still hear my rig, because the thing is, there's only a few of us that have in ears. Jules doesn't use them, the singers don't. So there needs to be a bass cab on stage. There needs to be some bass presence. But the in ears meant that I could turn the amp down, so it wasn't bothering Jules, but I could hear everything. And also I was hearing stuff I've never heard before, BVs, certain horns. It was great, but I felt like I was in a different county, because I wasn't getting that sort of, the feeling of the air moving from the speaker with the amp cranker. And that was a problem, especially when you're playing upright, because you need that feeling. You need that sort of pounding, the feeling that you get, or the vibration you get from acoustic instruments. So Porter and Davis did the platform. They made a bass platform, and I took out loads of prototypes. And of course, it's a vibrating platform that you stand on, and it fools your body into thinking you're standing in front of a huge PA system at top volume. So your body, and also, and this combination with some backline, which I can hear acoustically, the platform and the in-ears, that was it. I thought, I'm done here. This is my world. And some people don't like them because they feel it a bit isolating. But again, with the platform, it stops you feeling that isolation. It puts you back into the thick of it. And of course, I was coming off stage and my ears weren't ringing anymore. Like
I know, isn't it a bliss?
It's perfect. And also, with that platform, the other key thing is, if you're playing a stick bass, which the beauty of stick basses are, you can turn them up and they don't feed back, which is wonderful. But not having any acoustic qualities to them, you're missing that vibration of a real double bass. Well, the platform takes the place of that. So if you're playing a stick bass, the platform makes it feel like you're playing an acoustic instrument, whereas you're not really. So that was it. And then also I realized I could downsize my rig, because I used to have like double cabinets, like 2 4x10 cabinets. At one point I had 2 cabinets with 2 15s in it, 4 15s I had at one. So all of this time, and Jules wants less volume. Our front of house engineer wants less volume, because there's so many open mics on stage. There's all the horn players, Jules's piano, all have open mics. So if we can cut down the volume on stage, everyone's happy. So yeah, I still have a bass rig, but it just means I can turn it down enough for me to still hear it acoustically behind me, but just so it doesn't bother anyone else. So my rigs have gotten smaller.
It's something that's happened. I mean, technology's obviously changed a lot. But one of the things I've started noticing now is you're getting an awful lot more power out of a very compressed little cabinet, which is a lot more directional. How's that relationship? Because I said Bergantino, you're now using, I think you got, is it 112, 210? What's the backline?
Yeah, well, I switched to Bergantino a couple of years ago, and I've used lots of different stuff. And the thing is, it's all been fine. I think people think when you switch gear that it just means that you hate whatever else. It's not like that. It's not like that. But the truth of it is, needs, requirements, taste changes over time. And I just got to the point where I just thought, with the Bergantino stuff, I was looking for something a bit more accurate, a bit more refined, a bit more versatility, and especially the Bergantino amps, because I've got the B amp. And in the studio, I've got a high definition HDN 2x10 and a HDN 1x12.
Right.
Nice and lightweight things with the B amp. And that tends to be my studio rig. And that's easy to move around. It's a modular setup. And on tour, I just needed something maybe with a bit more heft. So I've got the Bergantino Forte HP, a high power.
Great head.
And the cab, it's actually a 4x12. But it's very clever. It's quite a compact cab. So at the front of it, you only see 3 12s. The 4th 12 is rear facing.
Okay, yeah, all right.
And it's called the HG412. HG stands for holographic, yeah, holographic. Yeah. The idea is you get more of a surround sound, type thing, but that's got some real heft to it, which you don't necessarily need in the studio. In the studio, you just need something that you can easily move around and that's very precise. And also, we don't do sound checks with Jules. This is another key thing. We never do them. Jules just doesn't want to do them. So luckily, we have a touring crew that have been with us for years. So they set everything up. They do all the line checks. We just have to turn up at the gig, before the gig starts. That's the most important. That's the
Really?
I mean, I think Jules likes to see us there, you know, maybe like half an hour, 45 minutes before, as opposed to 2 minutes
Yeah.
before. But really, we just walk on stage and we just start to play. There is no sound. So the Bergantino B amp is quite an elaborate amp. I mean, it's still very intuitive, but there's a lot of stuff there. That's why, for me, that's better suited to the studio when I've got time to tweak, experiment, whatever. But the Forte HP amp is a much more simpler layout, and it just means that it's easier to make quick adjustments during the first song or two if something's got moved or the room's a bit different, you know. So it's easier to tweak on the fly, the Forte HP. So yeah, and as a doubling player, the Bergantino stuff is more geared towards that because it's got things like notch filters in there. It's got high pass filters, low pass.
Yeah, nice.
So for me, as someone who plays upright and electric, it makes a lot more sense for me to use that gear. So so yeah, I've been using it for 2 years, and I think I'm done now. I think I can't imagine using anything else. I think that's me to the finishing line.
Let's see. We'll see. One of the things I always love, again, is for the guys that are watching. Obviously, me and Dave are kind of old buddies, and we always reflect on silly things. But just this year, well, actually last year, crikey, I had my 40th birthday, and I thought, there was always a bass that I always wanted. It was like made me go, oh, and I've actually bought it. This little headstock just sitting here. This is a first edition 1979 Music Man Saber.
Oh wow!
Now, the reason that I loved this little boy and I wanted to get hold of it, and it's absolutely mint. It's beautiful. But the reason I loved it was because my love of Tony Levin and the Cutlass and Cutlass 2s that came out. Now, just to add fuel to the fire, there's me going, oh wow, guys, check out this bass. And I put this photograph up of these limited edition Cutlasses. And then lo and behold, my phone goes off and there's Dave. Oh, I think they're actually my basses that you put a photograph there. And this is something that's been ongoing between me and Dave because every time he goes on the internet, there'll be a new bass and then he'd just put a sly little comment underneath addressed to me or something like that. And it's normally because of a mutual love that we both have for the MC924. I am a huge fan of vintage Ibanez's, but specifically that line. And there's the Roadsters and stuff like that. And this was a kind of I wasn't expecting this mutual ground with you, but there's some Ibanez love in the house from you as well, isn't there, Dave? And it's quite explicit. Let's talk about that for a second.
Well, you know, I've just done a joint interview with Snow Owl, the fabulous, who's our mutual friend, of course. And we were talking about Ibanez, and I think he asked me about my love and passion of them, as a lot of people do, because I think a lot of people still see Ibanez. They don't realise the full range of instruments they do, and some people are not familiar with the vintage ones either. A lot of people associate Ibanez with, you know, more entry-level student instruments, whereas if you take the time to look, they do some serious high-end stuff. In fact, the BTBs, which is predominantly what I play, and BTB allegedly stands for boutique bass. And again, people say to me, well, with all these big name companies out there, you know, these very high end boutique people, why, out of all the things you could probably choose or have an association with, why Ibanez? And it's actually because some of those said high end boutique handmade instruments have not always worked out terribly well. You know, and I won't name names because it's very unprofessional, not fair. But the truth of it is that, you know, the saying, all that glitters is not gold. You know, sometimes the more money that I've spent on something, I've actually been more disappointed. You know, and I think that the whole Ibanez thing, I'd already been collecting, well, vintage basses for the last 20 odd years, but vintage Ibanez I started to collect probably about 7 years ago. And I just knocked out with them. I had one Ibanez in the mid 80s. It was my first 5-string, and it was a Roadstar. And it was a bit unfortunate in the fact that it was a 4-string neck, and they'd squeezed a 5th string on there. It was very early days.
It's a bit narrow.
Yeah, and it was, and because back then I was doing a lot of slap stuff, which I don't do anymore, and I couldn't use it. But you know, it was my first ever 5-string. So after that, Ibanez went off the radar for me. But when I started to collect, as you said, the musician basses, which, you know, like late 70s, early 80s. And people call them the Japanese alembics. You know, they're just so magnificently
built like tanks.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
amazing things.
Well, people's main criticism is the weight of them. But, you know, I mean, I don't mind that. You know, for me, that's all part of it. But yeah, I mean, through neck, high-grade ebony fingerboards,
Yeah.
abalone inlays, angle-backed headstock.
That's it.
You know, the preamps were fantastic. They're my favourite 4-string basses.
Yeah.
Without question. Yeah.
I remember one of my very first teachers, Paul Scott, another double bass player, does the Glenn Miller orchestra, and Paul came into college one day, and I think it was because we was doing, I think, diamonds on the soles of their shoes. It was a Paul Simon study, and he pulled out his fretless, and it was a fretless MC9. I think he had Bartolini's. It was a 924. It'd been updated, upgraded. Yeah. I say upgraded, altered for his
right.
machine. But from that was 98. We're talking 24 years later, and I'm still going. That was the sound, man. That thing sounded killer. And forevermore, I've always got one eye. And if I ever see on like a second-hand thread, there's like an MC924 comes up for sale, and then somebody on there will go tag at Dave Swift, and then further down the thread there'll be tag at Phil Mann or something like that. That's good.
Yeah, they're magnificent. I mean, I to be honest with you, I'm not sure how many I've got. I mean, I've probably got about
too many, Dave.
But yeah, there are variations. You know, there's the polar white ones.
That's it. Yeah.
I think I've got about 5 of those. There's the dark stain one. There's natural ones.
Yeah, the studios.
There's ones that are just passive. You know, they don't have the preamp in there. So there are. It's not like every single one is the same, but. Yeah, I mean, I just fell in love with them. A friend of mine sold me actually one of the rarest ones, which is the fretless version, which is an MC940. I think he probably regrets doing that now. But the fretless ones are ultra rare, and and I've got 4 of those. I'm pleased to say, again with variations. And Ibanez did an ultra rare one for Alfonso Johnson, and it was most of the neck was fretted, and I think from the 12th fret upwards it was fretless. And it was an Ibanez musician, and that's probably the rarest of them all because I don't think many were made.
There's some great stuff like that, and before we start wrapping up the interview, there's I remember Ibanez doing the half and half fretted and fretless. They've always been at the forefront of technology. Just I heard a rumor though that you might have something in the wings coming up with Wilcox, so I'm going to pin you down for that now. So you've got something there because you've been doing some stuff with it. They're the short scale stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. So London luthier Viv Wilcock, you know, he specialises in making his own short scale basses, you know, generally 4-string instruments, and I've got one of his. It's the Malarkey, made for Rob Malarkey, bassist, and it's very, very cool. I hadn't got a short scale bass, and sometimes they're a great thing to have because they've got a certain sound to them, they've got a certain vibe to them, you know, that you can't get from any other type of instrument. So it was important to have one in my working arsenal. So a beautiful instrument that Viv made a couple of years ago. But I like quirky instruments. I like quite unusual stuff, and I've always had a fascination with baritone guitars and you know, short scale 6-string basses as well. So what's happening now is he's making me a custom short scale 6-string bass, which, you know, it's similar to the Fender 6 in the fact that it's got a narrow fingerboard and the strings are close together. But the idea is that it's not one thing or the other. It's not a guitar and it's not sort of a bass. It's a combination. So you can still play bass lines on it, but you can actually play chords as well because of the string spacing is closer, you know. But it's going to be one of those things predominantly played with a pick.
Yeah, nice, man. That's great.
But you know, it's very individual, and you know, he's hoping that, you know, this could become a production model. You know, might even be some kind of signature model. So he's in the middle of that at the moment. So I'm very excited. But I have to say though, because I do play some guitar as well. I started to play guitar last year, a couple of years ago. I've always struggled with guitar tuning, like E, A, D, G, B, and E. You know, it goes fourth and it goes up that third. It's always driven me insane. So the reason why I'm able to play guitar okay-ish is because I tune all in fourths. Yeah. And it's the same with this 6-string short scale bass that Viv's making me. It's going to be tuned all in fourths. Right. So the E goes up to a C and the E goes up to an F.
Nice.
And you know, then it makes sense to me. I understand all fours.
It's funny how just that one semitone, and I'm like, and there's so many, you know, close things. Obviously, Anthony Jackson talked an awful lot about bass being a guitar and stuff like that. But that is, like you say, it's that semitone completely wrecks me.
Yeah.
What's lovely here, Dave, is that obviously, although the pandemic over the last sort of 16 months has really kicked a lot of people, there's a lot of progress. The Wilcox comes out. There's lots of relationships being born. You've been very proactive during lockdown, and I would like to quickly touch on this lovely gentleman, Touch Your Feel. Okay, so this was quite a bit of well, I mean, where do you even go?
It's the worst looking boy band I've ever seen.
So lockdown arrived.
Yeah.
And you basically decided to lock down in a house and do your own thing. Tell the guys about what happened.
Well, it wasn't exactly my decision.
Oh, all right, okay.
I was press ganged. No, I'm kidding. No, there's a British guitarist, singer, songwriter called Todd Sharpville, who I'd worked with before, and he just decided that he just didn't want to be twiddling his thumbs unless there was a guitar in his hands all through lockdown. So just prior to the original lockdown, he contacted me and said, "Listen, I'm looking at forming a band, relocating to." Again, I hasten to add, this is before we were told not to do this.
Yeah, of course, that's right. Don't worry.
But and he said, I want us to relocate to this house, like a stately home type place that he'd hired. Because I say stately home because we needed somewhere big enough to house us all, so we could have some privacy. It's not just deliberately. Oh, it has to be a stately home or nothing. So we stayed at two different locations, but the last place was somewhere called Vowood, and it was, like I said, it was in Norfolk. And the idea was we were all privately tested, and our partners were. And we lived as a working band. So every day we were sort of learning songs, we were rehearsing, we were recording, and broadcasting. Every Saturday we would put out a live stream gig. But then what happened from that, which we didn't expect, a couple of quite famous sort of people came along and said, "We love what you're doing. We'd like to record with you." And one of them was a famous Irish musician called Phil Coulter. We recorded with him. An American lady called Aubrey Logan, who's a singer trombone player, who was actually on Jules's TV show. There is somebody else who is very, 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 very famous, a pop star person, who we recorded a track with remotely. He was in LA, we were in Norfolk. That's the way it was. And we recorded this song, and Todd is looking to have it released sometime this year. It's just, right now we're not allowed to say who it is.
Well,
it's very exciting. It was very exciting because it was just great to be working that whole time, and to be and Lucy came to visit with Oscar, and we would all have jam sessions and whatever. Yeah, there it is.
There you go. So it's good. Yeah, so this is it. This started to do well. You got quite a bit of publicity. There's you and your family. Look at you guys. That's wonderful. And there's the home. What an experience! Absolutely brilliant. It kind of reminiscent of, you hear all the, I'll say the golden days, the glory days, but when you hear about Zeppelin and Peter Gabriel and So and stuff like that, and everybody going in one house, locking themselves away to get one product done. This is brilliant, man.
Yeah, and we were writing stuff together as well, and it was very productive. Every day was about music, and I think if we'd have not got involved with that, we'd have all been sitting at home, like. I try and be productive even at home. So I'm still practicing, still studying, whatever. But that was, so it was like I never stopped working, I never stopped playing. So so right now more things are coming from that. So I'm kind of glad that we did it. It was a lot of fun.
You don't want to be stuck at home doing silly things like trying to launch a bass site or something like that. It's ridiculous.
I'm not clever enough to do so.
Neither am I, and it's very evident.
For me, it's still, I still like to keep sort of motivated, So just because you've achieved a certain thing in life doesn't mean it's down tools and that's the end of that. So like I said, when I was in this place, Vowood, owned by Simon Finch, who bizarrely used to date one of Jules Holland's sister-in-laws, and actually the owner was at Jules's wedding. Wow. With us 15 years ago. He's the guy that owns Vowood that we were living at. But yes, I was getting loads of time in practicing trombone, tuba, guitar. I still, it's important for me to still be proactive with that and to still keep up a skill set. You can't ever rest on your laurels. Really.
Well, and at the end of the day, this is a period. It will pass, and when it passes, you're going to be back on stage. You'll be doing exactly what you do and what we've loved you for as long as I've known you. So that's great. Dave, thank you. Happy birthday, mate. I hope you had an incredible birthday. I'm sorry I couldn't send you a horror. I think when I was going to buy a bass off you once, and I bought you a little horror book to say thanks and stuff like that. I'm sorry there wasn't a cake and a candle and that lot, but it's good. But those times will come, I'm sure, at some point in the future. Guys, this has been In Conversation with the devilishly handsome, amazingly tall, and disgustingly talented Dave Swift. That chap just there. Guys, I'm Phil Mann. This is With Bass in Mind. If you too can take time, there's lots of links to Dave's endorsements and website. They're going to be in the thread right beneath here. Go and show Dave some love. Go and show Bergantino some love. Wilcox some love. Ivanez some love. Most importantly, subscribe to With Bass in Mind so we can keep bringing these wonderful conversations. I'm Phil Mann. This is With Bass in Mind, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.